A couple of prison stories as well. One is about the building of more prisons. In fact, they're mostly already penciled in, or the extension of others. Angela Rayner set to force prisons through the planning process by overriding objections under the new laws. The government pledging to build these prisons will expand capacity for existing jails as it seeks to provide extra places by 2021. I mean, that's a build-up to the story. The big story that we're looking at here is that prison places will run out within 18 months, despite a commitment to spend 10 billion quid to provide 14,000 new places. So building 4 prisons, expanding the capacity of others, seeks to provide extra places by 2031. But if you're going to still keep on running out of places, then what is it? Do you have to have a rethink of what is going on? Have people just got worse as the population got a little bigger? I know that much. What the heck is going on? Chris Daw KC is with us to discuss this afternoon. To you, Chris, I know you've always had a big reservation on whether prisons are effective. You've been around the world, you've looked at other systems. I mean, primarily, let's just focus on that question. Why are prisons not the ultimate answer to the question?
Well, I think the most important detail of what you just said was £10 billion. We're going to spend £10 billion of our money, so that's all of your money from your taxes and VAT on your cup of coffee and all of the income tax that every one of your listeners is paying. £10 billion to create 14,000 new prison places, which are not enough on the current projection anyway, and the end result of which will be that the 14,000 people that are occupying those cells will become inherently much more likely to go out and commit further crime in the future, because that's the case with everybody that's in prison. And particularly those who are in prison for very short periods for relatively trivial non-violent crimes. Of course, not all trivial crimes are non-violent, and not all crimes that people end up in prison for are non-violent, but the vast majority are. 69% of those in our prisons already are non-violent offenders, and the likelihood of them reoffending is infinitely increased, or astronomically increased, by putting them in prison even for a day. So this is a waste.
Why does it, just on that point, Chris, I know you've said that a lot, and you know, and barristers, you guys are very clever at saying stuff a lot and hoping it sticks, but I'm sure it deserves a little bit of analysis on that idea that just because you go to jail does not automatically mean you are therefore going to commit more crime when you come out. I mean, a lot of people go to jail and go, that was horrendous, I'm never going back there again.
Not many do that. It's very, very rare for someone who's been in prison to come out and not reoffend again. Almost 100% over the course of a lifetime will reoffend, and 80% will end up back in prison from those who have been in prison. So these are real figures. I suppose one way of looking at it, you're right, us barristers are always clever at coming up with arguments. That's our job. But if you think about prison as being like a new car, I'm fortunate enough just got a new car, and it has a 3-year warranty and all the rest of it. Well, if almost 100% of new cars coming out of Audi or Volkswagen factories were faulty and basically stopped working within 3 years, no one would ever buy them, and the companies would go out of business. But that's exactly what our prison system's like. We put people in, and within 3 years, the great majority of them go out and commit another crime and end up back there. So if that's what's happening time after time, week after week, all over the world, not just in Britain, then the question is, do we really want to spend £10 billion of our money on something that fundamentally doesn't work, when the same 10 billion could undoubtedly be used for non-custodial things like drug treatment, alcohol treatment, all mental health care, which is one of the main drivers for people to end up in the prison system, is severe psychosis and other mental health problems, which are untreated in the NHS on many occasions. Let's spend 10 billion on all of that, and I'll guarantee you we won't need more prison places. We'll need to halve the number rather than increase the number.
Isn't the problem, though, Chris, that, I mean, the question we were throwing out, is there a more effective alternative? Because, of course, going to jail, there's more than one component at play here. Obviously, you are there to be punished. You are there to be removed as a potential danger from the rest of society. But just focusing on the punishment thing, if you were to say, you know, I'm a big supporter of tagging and curfews. I find that ludicrously underused. I still, it's particularly in the 21st century, in the digital world where we can do this stuff rather effectively. I find it extraordinary that isn't utilised more than it currently is. However, I can also see why some people would say, hang on a second, if you are I talked about the city fraudster earlier, who's ripped off, on a moody transaction and managed to trouser a couple of million quid, but then got caught. Well, if you stick a tag round his ankles and say you can't go out for 3 years from your own home, I mean, it might be a pain in the butt. But you'd think, well, I can still eat with my family. My mate Mick can still deliver a bit of marching powder around the house of an evening, so everything's not lost completely. It's not a bad do, really. So I did a terrible crime, and I still live in my house. I mean, that doesn't feel like a punishment.
Well, unless you've been under house arrest, I suppose you could make that argument.
But you'd take that over Strangeways, wouldn't you, every day of the week?
Well, having been to Strangeways probably hundreds of times, absolutely I would. But the reason why it's actually important that we do make more use of the types of technology that you've just mentioned is A, cost. So the cost of keeping someone in prison is around about £50,000 a year of our money, once again, going down the drain, achieving nothing. So someone in prison for, 10 years or so is $500,000 or more by the time inflation comes into play. So we're spending all of that money on keeping people in prison. And you identify the crux of the issue, Ian, which is, are we, the taxpayers, who ultimately have to pay for all of this and have to pay this 10 billion and all the other money that goes into criminal justice, are we willing to spend our money on something which makes people more likely to commit crimes? And if we are, fine. Let's be honest about that. But let's not pretend that putting people in prison for longer makes them less likely to commit crimes in the future, because it absolutely categorically doesn't.
Let's then take a look at the example of, the house burglar. Now, that's a particularly mean kind of crime. It's devastating for victims who don't just feel the loss of material goods. There's the intrusion factor. People often liken it to a terrible assault, often never getting over it, have to move house. Somebody who keeps doing that, they don't stop. They've done it 27 times. They've had a load of non-custodial sentences. They eventually went to jail, came out of jail, and as you rightly say, Chris, just carried on doing it again. What would you do with the prolific house burglar?
Well, absolutely. The first question I would ask, and it won't take long to answer it, is why are they prolific burglars? And the answer is, in almost every case of dwelling house burglary, the person is an addict of some kind or suffering from mental health problems. But generally speaking, an addict to something like heroin or cocaine, particularly crack cocaine, which drives a habit which costs hundreds and hundreds of pounds a week to sustain, and where people will commit desperate and extraordinarily damaging acts against other members of the public and householders just to get enough money for 50 quid or 100 quid, just enough to get them through the next sort of few hours and the few days. So the answer is an obvious one, isn't it? You deal with the drug problem rather than treating the thing as they just do this for the fun of it.
Your definition, Chris, of the house burglar, I mean, there's a lot of house burglars who do it because it's an easy way to earn a living. You haven't got to get up in the morning, you work at night.
None. Statistically,
organised crime as well.
No, but there's very few. I mean, I've been representing burglars, not so much recently as a KC, but certainly for sort of almost 20 years. I was regularly representing burglars, and I don't remember more than a couple that committed burglary other than to fuel a habit of some kind. Because let's be honest, there are much easier ways, such as shoplifting and various other ways, which are much less risky in terms of being caught, but also much less serious in terms of the sentences. So burglars are, on the whole, on average, desperate people who just need 50 quid to get enough drugs to last them a few hours.
OK, so what do you do with that person?
You've got to deal with that problem, Ian.
Do you just then say, well, OK, you've been found guilty of 27 house burglaries, you've wrecked the lives of several people, frightened the life out of them in the process as well. Some of them were sleeping while you were in there, etc. All of these horrible circumstances. So what we're not going to send you to jail, though, because Chris Daw's come up with an idea. We're going to send you to the Sylvia Merriweather Centre for Addiction, and down there they're going to, offer you some counselling. Then you can go back home in the evening. Is that it?
Well, Ian, I think it's a little inappropriate to denigrate drug treatment services and drug rehabilitation programs.
I'm not denigrating it. I'm simply asking whether that is itself is an effective response to a
sort of soft option. When in fact, anyone who's been
if you've committed 27 burglaries, that is a soft option, right?
It's not a soft option at all, because what's the point? If you're saying, well, there's 27 burglaries, automatically you should go to prison for 5 years or 10 years.
No, I'm asking what. I'm asking what. You're saying no punishment.
Putting them in prison, so they'll come out and do it again.
So what is the alternative? You're saying just go to the addiction clinic.
Well, you say just go to the addiction clinic, as if somehow going to an addiction clinic is easy. As I say, anyone who is an alcoholic or a severe drug addict and who has been through rehab will know how extraordinarily difficult that is. And I'm not for a moment trying to undervalue the impact of burglaries on people. Absolutely, that is true. But if I am burgled by someone and the answer to their burglary habit is to make sure that you treat their drug addiction, then just common sense suggests that that's what you should do, rather than waste millions of pounds over a lifetime locking them in prison so they can come out and do it again. The public want to do that.
Isn't the problem here, Chris?
That's great. Look, let's do it.
I'm bound to ask you this. Look, you're a very high-profile defence barrister. You deal with some very high-profile cases as well. You're much in demand, and of course in your DNA is defence. Is the problem with that you are unable to see that there are some bad people out there, Chris Daw, some really bad people? They might like a bit of Charlie of an evening and get drunk with their mates at the weekend, but they're bad. They don't want to go to work. They want to break into houses. They want to do horrible things. They don't play by the rules. They're just bad people.
Well, Ian, you may or may not have spent a lot of time sitting with career burglars or people with a prolific propensity to commit burglary. If you had, you would realise that they are mostly broken people. They are mostly people whose lives are utterly chaotic, that have no structure whatsoever and are dominated entirely by the need to get drugs. That's a medical condition, any form of addiction. And I think, as I say, those who are aware of, many people have family members who are addicted to alcohol or drugs, and not all of them, of course, go out and commit crimes to support a habit.
So no punishment, only help.
Most heroin and crack cocaine users do just that.
But I just want to establish, Chris, no punishment, just help.
No, I'm not saying no punishment at all, because I recognise that society does demand punishment, but punishment comes in different ways. I think my view is simply that you don't look at punishment first, because if you do, you'll spend tens of billions and you won't reduce crime. If you look at punishment alongside the availability of appropriate healthcare and addiction treatment, you'll massively reduce the amount of crime in society and the cost of dealing with it. And that, it seems to me, in the long run, it's not so much the 27 people who've already been burgled. You can't, sadly, stop that history. That's already happened. For me, what's important is that there's not another 27. And if you lock a burglar up for 3 or 5 years, I'll guarantee you he or she will be out committing burglaries within weeks of release.
There it is. Chris, as ever, thank you for your time. It's always an animated discussion.